All right.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from today. We want to thank you for joining this TechStrong learning experience with Harness. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. It will be available on demand afterward. We will send you a link to the recording once we conclude. We have some handouts in the resource section on the left side of your screen. Be sure to download those, check those out. We've also got some upcoming programs for you to check out. And we do have quite a few polls, so make sure that you are staying tuned, you are staying attentive so that you can answer all of those polls and give us some good feedback. Please send us any of your questions that you've got throughout the program. During the presentation, you should see that on the right side of your screen. And you can join us into the chat also on the right side of your screen. Tell us where you're tuning in from, share your experiences, your comments, your understanding on the matter. We do want to hear from you. We want to engage with you. Any questions that we're not able to get to, we want to make sure that we have those so that we can reach out to you after the program is over. So at the bare minimum, ask your questions throughout the program, as many questions as you've got. Let's go ahead and kick off today's topic, engineering safer systems, how experimentation improves infra releases. We're joined with Heather Miller-Davis, experimentation advisor at Harness. We've got David Caro, progressive delivery advocate at Harness. Heather, David, I want to thank you both for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you for while I turn my camera and microphone off.
Cool. Thank you very much. And really, it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be able to talk to everyone about this very exciting topic today. So let's just move into quick introductions. Good evening from the UK, which is where I'm based. My name is Heather Davis. I'm an experimentation advisor at Harness Feature Management Experimentation, which we'll refer to throughout the presentation as Harness FME. I have over 15 years experience in the experimentation space. My role as an advisor really entails being a hand-on support for all things experimentation for our customers. So that's everything from tactical day-to-day support, tool agnostic best practices for getting started with experimentation, how to build a program for scale and to impact meaningful business metrics, and to ultimately build a culture of, learning and data-driven development. And then alongside that is how we help customers get value from our Harness FME tool. I am typically in my day-to-day supported with a technical counterpart. And for the purpose of today's webinar, I'm joined by my colleague, Dave Caro, who is on hand to support with any technical questions that might come up throughout, as well as the experimentation ones. So what are we going to talk about today? Today, I'm going to take you on a journey through the world of possibilities when leveraging release monitoring and experimentation on your infrastructure. So this is really going to help you innovate and learn in a safe way. And so what more could you wish for? And we'll dive into what all of this means in a little bit. So I'd like to set the scene with this really powerful statement. Infrastructure is the silent backbone of every product. Invisible when it works, unforgettable when it fails. I'm sure this will ring true and really resonate with a lot of you in this room. You'll all be very familiar with how incorrectly changing infrastructure can lead to serious and costly consequences, ranging from things like minor performance dips to a full-blown outage or a security breach. These problems often escalate quickly because infrastructure is the foundation for everything else in a system. Decisions, for example, migrating to a different database provider, adjusting caching strategies, or even selecting new cloud infrastructure can significantly impact your performance, latency, and resource utilization. So let's be honest, infrastructure isn't flashy. It doesn't get all the cool feature release blog posts and fancy fireside chat discussions, but it is what keeps products running. And if you don't measure or test and optimize those changes, you will continue to end up relying on luck and not strategy. So this is really going to be the foundational message of my presentation today. So let's start with some real life examples. Picture this. Perhaps you're being asked to migrate to a new infrastructure, testing new caching layers, or even deploying new versions of core services, and possibly even dreading addressing these massive changes to some degree whilst flying blind. And so let me ask you this now. possibly rhetorically, feel free to post questions in the chat as well, which we can help answer throughout the presentation or afterwards. But do these changes sound risky to you? Let's say you need a new DB or message queue, new caching layer, new auth layer, and all whilst you're being tasked to do more with less, where shrinking teams and hiring freezes means that engineers are covering way more systems with fewer resources. You're always on call, always reactive. You're living in an alert-driven world with constant retroactive firefighting. Perhaps you have really high expectations for uptime and speed placed on you, or even experiencing that concept of invisible success, invisible failure, where you're only really noticed when something breaks, right? And maybe even lacking the proper tools to experiment and monitor safely. So it's easy to fall into the let's do it now and debug later trap, which we really are here to avoid. So this is what we're going to refer to today as the grind, right? If we think about these two concepts. So this is a classic all or nothing case. There's no way for you to isolate the change, no way to measure the impact ahead of time, and no way to identify or find the best solution to the problem. So when changes inevitably go sideways, the only option was a really painful rollback with quick patches. Now, I think we can all agree in this space that this is really high stakes and really not fun, right? No one wants to get those 2 a.m. calls and, a lot of pressure to fix things. So the chance here really to find the best solution through iteration is also missed because we've just responded instead of maybe thought about the best solution for scale in a safe way. Now, what if you could make big changes less of a grind and more of a game? So think about it like the alternative option to how it is, typically done. No one really likes the grind, and it wouldn't be so much more fun to test this safely with low stakes, right? Really being able to try new things. So what if you were given the opportunity to do things a little differently and find real long-term solutions by experimenting with these changes, maybe like PMs do who experiment on product features? You may have been familiar with product teams who do run experiments. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a very similar concept that we are going to walk through today. So, for example, you could introduce, say, changes with gradual releases as experiments, measure outcomes, and stop issues before they hit production. Ultimately, there's way more control and a lot less pain. So I have some really great news for you. You can actually do this today. And I'm going to go through 3 really amazing examples of how this will be the case. Right? So let's say you're migrating to new infrastructure. Feature flags can be used to gradually roll out a migration to a new infrastructure, such as, say, a new database or messaging queue. For example, a flag could enable the new system to say 1% of your users initially, and then 5%, and then 20%, and so on, allowing for close monitoring and rollback if issues arrive. So again, this is a perfect example where you're making a really big change, but you have that safety net of, I don't want to expose this to everybody until I'm certain that this is, definitely working for this 1% of my user base. And then you incrementally increase and test at each stage until you're happy and get to 100%. If any issues do arise, you quickly roll back, fix it, kill the flag, fix it, and then continue to ramp that percentage of traffic upwards. Another great example is testing new caching layers. Now, a feature flag can also be used to, let's say, route requests through a new caching layer for a subset of users. So you can target to specific users as well, not just everybody. So you can be very specific about that, as well as the percentage of that audience and that population who will be shown this change. And this ultimately allows you to have the space for that performance testing and validation before, as I mentioned earlier, enabling it to everyone. And then the third example I've got for you today is deploying new versions of core services. So a feature flag can be used to deploy a new version of a core service. Let's say, a user authentication service to a small percentage of users, allowing for early detection of issues and quick rollbacks. So these are three really great examples of infrastructure changes where you have that complete control, right? You have the code wrapped in a feature flag. You can manage the blast radius effectively of how many people are exposed to this change. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the experimentation piece and where that factors into this as well. So there's a couple of things I want to start with. We've now established a few great examples, some of which you may be familiar with. Maybe you have done some feature flagging in the past, maybe not. Let's take a step back, and I want to talk about these two core ingredients that are required here. And I want to make sure we're all on the same page with regards to what these are, what the differences are, and how they're really going to help change your life fundamentally in terms of, how you can go about optimizing and testing infrastructure changes. So the first one is release monitoring. And in a nutshell, this is basically to know what's happening in real time. Experimentation gives you the ability to test ideas safely and make data-backed decisions. So these are the two things I'm going to talk about before we go into an example of an experiment and some of the principles there. So when we talk about release monitoring, some of you may be familiar with this. Maybe you already do it. Would love to hear in the chat or any questions around how you do that today. But to start with some basic definitions to be sure we're all on the same page here. If I had to sum up what release monitoring is, it's about knowing when things go wrong before your users do, right? That's the fundamental principle of it, right? Which is great. Everybody wants that. You don't want to find out through call center complaints or, downtime and customer end user impact. Release monitoring effectively lets you track metrics, for example, latency, errors, throughput in real time, tagged to specific deployments or changes or flags. And it's basically like having X-ray vision on your infrastructure changes. The ability to quickly identify something's going wrong, something's not quite right before you roll it out to everybody, and even before it really touches any meaningful user base.
Hey, Heather. I just put up a poll for this one. I apologize. I forgot to do one of the polls before, but we got a poll up here asking if folks do any form of automated release monitoring. And yeah. I'll get bigger for just a sec here while some more people chime in. But it's an interesting mix.
Okay. So, yeah, like a good mix. I mean, it looks like it's changing almost 50-50, I'd say. So a good portion who don't do any form of release monitoring today, and some who are a little more familiar.
Cool. All right. I'm going to give just a couple seconds and I'll close the poll. And I think there's a short delay between when I speak and when you hear it. So I'm going to count a bit here and then we'll wrap the poll up.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see the mix, in particular for those who are not familiar with the automated release monitoring. We'll go into that in more detail, how this could help you, how you could get started with it. Definitely think it's going to change your world. And for those who are familiar, any questions you have on the experimentation piece and how that layers in, please do, give us your questions. Cool. Thank you for the poll, Dave. And thank you everyone for responding. Right. So the next slide I want to get into is almost, I guess, address the elephant in the room. I had a lot of fun with this slide. I think, I have spoken to a lot of people in product and engineering, and experimentation is a really big thing in product, right? There, like I say, there's a lot of blogs out there, and really what I want to address here is that, contrary to what you might think, experimentation is so much more than just testing buttons and placement and product UI related things, or something that a PM as a role might do. So really want to hit home that it's not just for product, it's definitely something that you guys can do as well. To really hit home on the quote I had at the beginning, you're deploying services that could crash the system, which is arguably way more important than maybe a new feature, or important in a different way, right? And I would say that you need those kill switches, those gradual rollouts, those progressive delivery and experimentation capabilities way more than product. So I see the poll.
It's a great,
100% so far. I think that it is just for product. So again, kind of speaks to really honing in on the point here that it is a myth. I'm hopefully going to change your minds with the presentation today.
Actually, Heather, I led the witness, so I wrote that one. I already saw it as part of the engineering mindset. So
Okay.
what's funny is actually so far everyone has answered they do think experimentation matters here and is useful. So no one's weighed in with it's just for product so far, which is just for those in the audience. Quite often if you mention experimentation amongst a bunch of engineers are like, well, marketing does that. We don't do that in engineering, right?
Yeah.
To be fair, I did lead the witness a little bit by saying I already saw it as part of the engineering mindset, because obviously trying things and looking at the data, it just makes sense. But it's great that the audience is certainly inclined to come along.
I think I misread the responses. But that's great to see, actually. That's great to see that, that is already part of your mindset, the ability to kind of use that as a way to test safer systems effectively.
And the other thing I'll add in, Heather, is I was speaking with one of our staff engineers yesterday. Let's go jump on screen. I was speaking with one of our staff engineers, and I asked her about this, and she said, well, we all have access to graphs and charts or whatever, whatever telemetry we're using, but the thing that she thought was really cool about this approach that you're talking about today is if you make it your everyday and you basically sort of automate this stuff, instead of having to think, oh, well, what charts do I have to build and how do I write this query and what's the right query to be able to catch what's happening while I do this thing, and again, get back to grind versus game. Like once you have release monitoring in place, you have experimentation in place. It's really using the same thing. So that was her point, was that the best bang for the buck the best what's in it for me as an engineer is just knowing it's going to be there and being able to use it without having to build it from scratch every time I'm going to do a release. That was what she chimed in with.
Yeah, that is a really great point. It is leveraging those same features, right? The ability to use the percentage targeting, the slow rollouts, the percentage splits, all of which we'll go through an example as well of how you can actually do that within the Harness FME platform.
Cool. I'm going to jump back off.
Cool. All right. So again, this is experience I've had where maybe, again, just to follow on with the elephant in the room, some objections I've seen in the past or heard in the past, just wanted to kind of put this out there. If any of these ring true to you, maybe they don't, maybe, you do agree already with the need to measure, the need to experiment for safer solutions. A couple of them, just to read them out. Experimentation is for PMs. I think we've already agreed it isn't. That relationship between engineering and product and different stakeholders in the business, everyone should be testing and optimizing and using really feature flags to support with safer rollouts and delivering better products for your end users. So, I think reading the slide, you can kind of make the assumption yourself. It's really a no-brainer. And I just wanted to put this up here because these are things I've heard in recent years. I know people have said and thought them and then kind of really changed their minds about their perspective of this, really, with the product that we'll go through today. And going back to what I said earlier, in a world where you're constantly asked to do more with less, build faster, fix faster, that mindset won't scale with complex systems, right? So you need to shift from that blind shipping and even just having some basic, APM metrics. You really want to move to a world of complete informed releasing. Use all the tools in your toolkit to help you learn what works best to ship faster, to ship safer, avoid any painful rollbacks. And ultimately, I think the argument of creating a single feature flag with some metrics will save you so much time in the long run, debugging and de-risking for hours on end. And ultimately also the added benefit through experimenting of being able to learn what works and to be able to test completely new and different ways of doing things that maybe you couldn't really do before because you didn't have that safety net. So yeah, I don't know, Dave, if you had any.
Yeah, I was going to chime in on something. I think part of why historically these have been the things people would say is that when experimentation was a separate thing that you had to A, understand, B, set up, C, babysit, very valuable to giant e-commerce companies that can make a 0.5% difference in conversion and it's millions of dollars, like they would do it. But when feature flags, when you're using feature flags anyway because you're doing trunk dev or you're using feature flags just for sanity for whatever reason you're using them, when you can just do experimentation using those, it's not a whole nother thing. I mean, I used to talk to people like, well, when we're done with an experiment, we have to actually revise the source code to take the experiment out, or we keep getting charged for the experiment. I'm like, wait, what? That was really weird to me. Like, yeah. So if you're using feature flags at all, homegrown or otherwise, this is just basically a way to leverage that same approach to be able to get the data when you need it, kind of with no heavy lifting. So that's it should just be part of it's like electricity. It should just be there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So for those who maybe are less familiar with experimentation, I wanted to kind of go into explaining what it is, right? You might have heard different terms for this: A/B testing, split testing. Experimentation is the kind of newer form of, product infra testing. Whereas A/B testing has been traditionally over the years seen as marketing, right? Your button colors, your landing pages, things like that. So it's really transformed over the last 10 to 15 years. And so the crux of it is it's about identifying your biggest infrastructure problems, forming problem solution statements, also known as hypotheses, isolating these changes, rolling them out in controlled portions of your traffic, whilst you report on performance of the original versus the new change, right? And this will basically allow you to continuously improve and develop perhaps more stable infrastructure to support the complexity and scale of, how you'd like to grow and scale. And again, the demands and the ever increasing changes of our world where, customer demands are everything. And customer expectations are really high. So that's really, I guess, a high-level explanation of what experimentation is when compared with purely release monitoring as a safety net. It's about giving you the tools to compare two versions and see which performs best against your metrics. And so here's a very simple, I guess, rudimentary example. So you have, your existing configuration, for example, your new configuration, the ability to toggle traffic between them and say, you know, maybe you want to start out with 90, 95, 5%, eventually get to 50-50. There's a layer on top of this of how much of the total population you are exposing this to. So let's say 10%, ramp it up. And then, you know, this gives you the complete control and ability to test these two new versions whilst understanding key metric performance for every single feature and every single rollout. And, you know, any concerns, you can kill the flag, fix it, restore it, resume. No painful rollbacks, no long delays, no long debugging. You know, you really have that complete control. And just to be clear, the goal here, as I mentioned, unlike product, is not to test user behavior, right? Like you would expect in a, you know, product experiments or A/B tests, but to compare system behavior under different, let's say, configurations that you might like to test. So if you remember the three examples I touched on, let's go with, say, the caching, the new caching strategy example, or the caching layer, rather. What if we experimented on this instead, right? What would that look like? So the steps in experimentation, the fundamental and foundational steps for any experiment are, first of all, identifying your problems within the infrastructure. So this isn't just one, maybe there's multiple areas, you know, you'd like to address. Then forming a hypothesis, designing your experiment, build QA launch, and then interpreting the results. So we're going to go through each of these with one of the examples, and we'll give you some examples from the Harness FME product so you can see what that might look like with our tool. So the first thing is the experiment design. This is super important. As a first step, you want to solve real problems. Try not to solutionize, which is, you know, starting with a solution and retroactively kind of adding like this is a problem for us. You want to start with the pain points. For example, maybe, you know, lag, CPU spikes, inconsistent load balancing. You know, no assumptions, just observable issues that affect your system health or performance, right? Then once you've decided which is the most critical problem to solve, or maybe you already have most likely a long laundry list of things you'd like to change and do and adapt, those are easy places to start with the release monitoring and building in and layering in the ability to experiment. So then we have what's called a hypothesis or a problem statement. Now, it's effectively a prediction you create prior to running an experiment that states clearly what is being changed, what you believe the outcome to be, and why you think that's the case. Now, for example, you might have a hypothesis for the new caching layer of the new cache layer will reduce latency because it better reflects observed usage patterns than the status quo does. Right? And you always want to be sure to back it up with any evidence from any logs, metrics, or previous patterns that you have to make sure that you have a key success metric, right? To identify success, this is better than this, or maybe the original is better. And you know, it just helps you determine which path to take, where to invest your time and your build and your resources, potentially even tooling. So it's a great cost-saving feature. In particular, in terms of both the intangible time of people versus, you know, kind of the tooling side as well. So then carrying on with design, you know, and this isn't meant to be exhaustive, but you really want to think about, okay, well, you know, it's not the actual design, it's more about experiment details, right? To enable your organization to rigorously evaluate the impact of these changes made, ensuring that decisions are grounded in empirical evidence rather than assumptions, or maybe just like, well, we don't have the ability to test, so we're just going to go with this because it's better than nothing, right? You might have, you know, you really want to use that data to figure out which is better. So the first thing is to select the test group. You want to define that control or the original versus the experiment that I mentioned in that diagram. So you might have in you know, going on with our caching example, You might have current cache, which is your current cache, versus the experiment group, which is your new cache. Then you want to wrap this logic in your feature flag. You can enable fine-grained control with the percentage targeting I mentioned, with targeting specific users using our targeting rules. Then you want to think about those success metrics, right? In this case, it might be things like response time, cost to serve, error rates. What are those critical metrics that you're going to want to look at and keep an eye on to say, yes, this is a success, or maybe it hasn't worked as well as we like. And then the last ones really are configuring your rollout, really defining how do you want to slowly ramp, how do you want to split the traffic, and then defining any kill criteria, right? There's a kill button, which is a nice handy feature. If something's flagged, something is not going the direction you'd like, you can kill the flag, but you might want to set some presets for rollback. So I will cover this in the metrics section as well. But this is really where, let's say you want to create a metric for response time. You can set an alert threshold that says anything greater than 20% of the baseline response time, I'm going to get an alert to tell me this is the case. And we want to go on and kill that flag and figure out why this is happening, right? And all the while, you're still able to fix that, restore it, continue, and carry on with, let's continue exploring, now we've addressed this, which is still the better approach. So these are just some things to think about, right? You want to plan ahead. You don't want to have to deal with this midway through and be like, oh, I'd have to think about this particular criteria. So then jumping into the metrics a little more, we have two key metrics to really think about, right? Your key metric is your single success metric that will definitely be impacted by the change. So in our case, it might be response time. Then you have guardrail metrics, which are metrics that could be impacted that you'd like to monitor for health, or just generally, interested to see how they perform, keep an eye on them. They're also very important to the business. So some guardrail metrics for this particular experiment might be cost to serve, or error rate, or throughput. But just to kind of call out the difference between the two, you always want one that's going to be your North Star, success or not success, but you have a bunch of other ones you can also build in. And so to carry on with the metrics piece, if you were to use Harness FME, the platform for this, let's call it Harness FME. Then you might want to consider the following. For example, it's not uncommon for engineering teams to have really limited monitoring in place already. Perhaps you're only monitoring a handful of narrow use cases or metrics. And again, as I mentioned, it feels maybe much easier to kind of get the feature out, bug bash later. But, you're really kind of just backlogging your issues here. You can front load a lot of this. So you could be the ones to catch the issue before a customer or end user does. So it's worth taking that time, as I mentioned, to really think about the things you want to measure beforehand. Here is a non-exhaustive list of, types of metrics that we've worked on with our own customers. Every organization is, of course, very different. These might not all be relevant to you. You might have different ones. But some of the common ones we see used are things like performance metrics. This is where your team is probably most familiar with and what you're likely already doing based on some of the polls. You also have user experience metrics. So this isn't necessarily what you think in the case of product or UI, UX, but it is also very much to do with how your users are experiencing things like load times, errors, failed requests. It's a good extension to performance metrics to help you understand how those are tracking. And then there may be business metrics, right? This, again, it isn't just for product, because if your release is hitting key metrics that your business cares about, you want to know and fix that before you get called out by someone in your org, You want to be proactive. Again, add in everything you can to help you cover all your bases, right? And then on top of that, there's a layer of, once you have these, you've defined your metrics, you can layer in those automated alerts so that based on specific thresholds, or even based on if it's significant or not, if there's any kind of major movement with certain ones, you will be alerted automatically that, hey, got pinged in Slack, got pinged in my email, got pinged on my phone, there's something you need to pay attention to and address. So again, it gives you that peace of mind. And then moving into experimentation build. This is an example. Let's say, you have in Harness FME the complete control of configuring your experiments within different environments. So more commonly, there might be a staging or a sandbox, and then you might have a production environment that you want to promote it to once you are happy that you've tested certain things in staging. So this is a perfect example of how you'd configure your feature flag treatment. So you want to define your treatments, original, and the new caching layer versus the existing caching layer. You can see here as well that we have a default experience. So if you were to kill the flag, it would immediately default to that particular experience. So you're comforted by that fact that you've killed it, give you time to fix it, restore it, but and it'll restore to the original treatment split that you've defined. And then to kind of go a little deeper, what I mentioned about the slow ramp. So here you can see you have our feature is called limit exposure. So you can slowly ramp this from 1% even to 100% over as many days as you like, however quickly you like. The real benefit here is that whilst you are testing your two different experiences to 50-50, you can slowly introduce traffic in production and test staging, whichever environment you're in, to slowly introduce traffic completely controlled by you. When you're happy, it's safe, your metrics are happy, there's no red flags, no alerts, you can continue to ramp that up until you get to a point where you can run the experiment and monitor those results. So the key best practice I want to highlight here is progressive rollouts are big. Identify issues early before harm is caused to your wider user base, right? That's the key takeaway here. And then finally, we're at interpreting your results. Now we have a fully fledged results dashboard. As you can see from the screenshot, these are all your metric cards. So the metrics you set up with your alerts. It'll highlight if something's statistically negative or positive. It'll help you understand how to interpret these results and make a decision on how to move forward. And so you have your key and your guardrail metrics to, help you make those decisions. And so it's important that once the experiment has run its course, you have that data to make that data-driven decision. And as I mentioned before, you might find that, was your hypothesis right? Was it not? Maybe it had some unintended consequences. Maybe it got worse. But that's okay, because the point is you learned something before a fully fledged rollout or even a full build, and you're doing it safely.
Hey, Heather, I was just going to say, why don't you pop back to that slide for a sec? I just realized something we didn't mention is that, as engineers, we have a lot of stuff to do, and you may be very curious about something and want to go deep, but you also might not have a lot of time. And so some feedback we've gotten was like, help me make sense of this quickly. And thank God we're in the era of AI. So literally, we've always had for quite a while, we've had a feature where for an individual metric, you could say, what is this really telling me? And in addition to that feature, sort of summarize feature for a metric, we actually have that across the whole experiment now. So this is a particularly loaded dashboard. There's what, at least dozen things on here, right? You can say, what do I need to know? And it would literally look over this and go, well, here's the deal. There's what you should be thinking about is this, and your next steps are probably that. So it's kind of like having somebody who's been down this road before and asking them, what do you think of what you see here? As opposed to you having to like spend some unknown amount of time like trying to figure out, what is this telling me? What does it mean? So you may love all the detail, or you may want to like, net it out for me. And maybe we should change the button from summarize to net it out. I thought people should know that that's, it's totally reasonable that you should expect to be, once you have access to that kind of summarizing and bottom lining, it's super helpful.
Yeah, great call out, Dave. Yeah, and then another best practice I wanted to call out off the back of that is, again, coupled with progressive delivery, the power really here is the ability to test and monitor various features, various versions of those features, and quickly see like which are performing badly, which are not performing maybe as expected, which are doing nothing, which are performing well, and all the while, it's pretty hands-off. You can go in and check the dashboard whenever you want, but those automated alerts, those kill switches will all help you sleep a little better at night, hopefully, while still having the benefit of learning things and iterating quickly. So to quickly summarize, we've got our hypothesis, our design. We've got the new caching layer, which we said would reduce things like latency. The design, we've identified, we want to use a feature flag. We want to say start it out at 10%, slowly ramp it to 100, test it 50-50. We have our key metrics and alerts that we want to monitor. And then ultimately, that's going to give you a great foundation to determine what to do next, right? Do we move on? Do we go ahead and make that change? You have the confidence from data. You have the confidence that it's safely tested. Everybody's happy. And, you can do this with pretty much most things in infrastructure. So experimentation really turns the fear into feedback, and, feedback and learning. So again, without an experiment, you might have that manual rollback, frustrated teams, poor response times. But with the experiment, you've got the gradual rollout, the live metrics, the kill switch, the config, the ability to tweak your configs. Everybody's happy because, again, I think everyone would much prefer the version where you can sleep better at night and you have, again, all of those things to help you make decisions, but also to be able to test with that.
Heather, I love that the unhappy side of the slide here got transformed. The conversion between Google Slides and PowerPoint. It's funny, before we uploaded to the platform. But it's actually hilarious that the right side of it looks good. So it's kind of a point, which is like, had we actually run through an experiment on how this would render, we could have basically said, we're switching to a static image. But however, it's all good. There was another poll we were going to ask here, right? So I'm going to toss it
go for it.
There. That's this one right here. I'm being a little playful with how I worded this, but if you could try a config change in production with near zero blast radius, and it's not zero because by definition you're doing a production. It's just that you're affecting such a small percentage of production that I had a lawyer friend that used the term de minimis, which sort of means it's like not enough to matter, right? Like it's basically zero, but it's not, it's a number, right? And then the middle one is like, I prefer press and pray. You only live once. That's YOLO. If you know that acronym, it's you only live once, which is like, let's just go for it. And kind of depends on what you're doing. I haven't met many of the guys at the banks that have the YOLO attitude. But if you're rapidly iterating something that's going to be totally different a week from now, you might be like, hey, let's just get it out there, But we all live in different worlds. Some of us live in worlds where we change things every few months. Some of us change things every few hours. That's kind of the rare, but it happens. Cool. Lots of interaction there. I appreciate you guys engaging with the polls. It's always good to know kind of like who's out there, Heather and I have done this more than once. And, when you're doing a webinar, it's kind of like being in an auditorium with a really, really dark audience, bright lights pointing at you and a dark, you can't even see who's in the audience, right? It's much better to have the interaction. That's great. So I think that's probably our last poll. I'm gonna leave it up for just a couple seconds more, and then I'll make it a little smaller so you can get back to the presentation though.
Cool. All right. So yeah, so I really want to kind of begin to wrap up with, really highlighting again some of the benefits of infrastructure measurement and experimentation. Why should this matter to you? We already covered a bit on the benefits. Dave had some great examples of like why this is a no-brainer. But I really want to hit home the point with these five benefits. Because safer infrastructure changes basically means, reduced risk, right? The space to learn safely, which isn't something we all have today. The ability to innovate faster. So again, you can try lots of new things that maybe you couldn't do before because you didn't have the tools. Better decision-making, again, having the data, not guesswork, having the space and the time to be able to test and play around with these things. That's always better than just guessing. And as Dave mentioned, hoping and praying. Continuous improvement, right? This isn't just about this one micro action, this one change. This is the bigger picture. This is a cultural change. This is, a way to empower engineers and yourselves to take control of building better systems for scale. And then last but not least, cost efficiency, right? Feature flags and experiments let you learn before committing to any changes, which is always a good thing. And I'm sure any product colleagues who are maybe experimenting in your organizations can definitely attest to that. Because what's more expensive than just releasing something and hoping it changes? So I really wanted to kind of pass it back to you guys. Really keen to hear or any maybe questions when we go through the Q&A portion shortly. What hypotheses do you have? What based on what we've gone through today, what are the types of things that you think would be cool to test and learn where some of this might feed in and be applicable? So and Dave, maybe I'll ping over to you quickly as well, whether you have any other thoughts other than the three we shared at the beginning.
Yeah, we alluded, by the way, so like the mother of all cases where this makes your life so much easier. I mean, I used to be involved in load testing quite a bit, and we would deliberately, of course, beat things up pretty hard. But I also was around for things like a database migration that's supposed to take 3 hours. Back when we could have maintenance intervals where we'd shut stuff off and like, oh, we're going to shut it down, at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night or whatever. And you get to the point where like, okay, we're loading the data into the new database, and it's looking like it's going to take 3 days. And or you got it all loaded, but the indexing is going to take until midday Monday. And it's not fun. It's not fun to write that email or get that alert like, oh, we're really sorry. And what's cool about the sort of like mother of all ways to do this is really, if you have time to kind of look into it, is a multi-stage sort of persistence layer migration. And you think about it, if you're working on one database and you want to work on a new one, what you do is you keep the legacy one up and you're reading and writing to the legacy, but then you bring up the new one and you write to it, but you're not reading from it yet. And the end user traffic is driving the writes, but you're not doing any of that data yet. And then you get to the point where you, after you've ramped it up, where you've got 100% of the traffic able to write to the new data store and it's not falling over, you might start doing what they call dark reads, which is that you'd have the client reading the data, but not presenting it to the user. So now you've got the legacy is still doing all the reading and writing. It's the thing you trust and love or whatever, or enough. And then you get to the point where you can actually ramp up slowly. You're slowly ramping up those writes, and then you're slowly ramping up those reads. And then while you're doing the reads, you're also doing what they call parity testing, which is to compare the result you're getting from the old and the new. They should be the same because it wasn't your intention to change what the user gets. You're trying to change how you fetch it and retrieve it. And at each stage in the way, you can run those stages indefinitely. Like you could literally run any of those stages for days if you wanted to, because nobody's noticing anything. So you don't take the system down for this, right? And then once you say you have confidence that the scale is working great, you could have in the background been migrating historical data to the new database, and maybe that's going to take longer than you thought. Well, that's okay. Keep reading from legacy, right? And you're doing the dual reads and writes, but like the user's only seeing legacy until you get that done. So what used to be an oh my god fire drill, which by the way in my 20s was kind of exciting, I'd say it was kind of fun. But you can only soak yourself in adrenaline so often before you get kind of burnt out. And so it's nice that there's much better ways to do things. So that's a kind of a multi-phase migration driven by flags that are controlling where the writes and the reads happen. And there's a few different ways to skin that cat, but that one to me is like the kind of ultimate example. But literally caching, super common. Auth layer is a little trickier because there might be like the need to have one be authoritative, but people do it. And those are sort of the ones I think that come most to mind from the other.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Dave. So hopefully that gives you a lot of food for thought around, things that you could go and take away right now today. Start thinking about how you would implement that. So to wrap up, I want to really just spend the next slide or two to help you get an understanding of what this looks like, right? Within the Harness FME platform and some of the practical steps if you were to get started today. So the first thing you'll have to do is create an active flag. Then you want to implement a feature flag that receives traffic in a production environment. You can ingest data in 4 possible ways. We have an events track call, an events third-party data integration, an events API endpoint, or an events SDK suite or RUM agent. Then step 3 is creating those metrics we talked about. You can manually create metric definitions, or we have what's called out-of-the-box metrics, which are automatically created. For example, your Google Lighthouse score are some common ones that we'll be able to pull through. Then the other key component for measurement is using a percentage rollout, right? So we talked about this in the screenshot, making sure you have that 50-50 split or 80-20, however you'd like to split it. As long as that's there, that will activate measurement. And then you can detect that impact through automated monitoring, receive your feature flag alerts, receive your metric alerts, report on the dashboard that Dave and I talked about. And this is really how it all comes together. And effectively what we do is we record every decision flow as impressions, right? We record performance and behavioral data flow as events from your, say, app or integrations or even offline sources. Our attribution engine then constantly joins those impressions and events for every rollout, calculating those metrics from a unique perspective for each individual flag. And then if any of those metrics violate the alert thresholds that you set, an alert is generated and you'll be informed and be able to make those decisions as to whether, to kill the flag and how to move on with that. And then, I really want to kind of talk a little bit about the split suite, also known as SDK suite. Some of you may be familiar. We were formerly split, acquired by Harness FME just over a year ago now. So we have actually rebranded this as the SDK suite. But this is effectively where you would use the SDK and performance data to immediately get that flowing into the platform. And we've enhanced the way that we integrate with your apps and websites and different platforms to make sure you get that value faster and you can monitor things super quickly without really needing to manually send any events to us at all. And so it reduces the maintenance and cost of managing all of that as well. And yeah, just super easy for you guys to adopt the platform and really kind of get experimenting as quickly as possible. So I just wanted to kind of capture that process, what that would look like within the platform. And then, again, to really highlight the point, if you are familiar with how the platform works, as I mentioned, you normally would have to manually send events, manually define metrics, but with some of those auto-created out-of-the-box metrics, we do all of this for you. So again, less work and faster time to value. So I want to thank everybody for your time today. And, in the resources panel, there's a link for you to check out our product page, where you can learn a little bit more detail about our approach, how we work. And while you're there, you have the option of requesting a demo or grabbing a free account even. It's totally up to you. Recommend having a look into it. But want to take the time to thank everyone for today. I want to open up the floor for some questions. If you have any questions on what we've talked about today and the topic for myself on the experimentation front, or Dave from a more technical standpoint.
Or the blurry world in between. There's already a handful of questions here, but go ahead and drop any additional questions you got in the Q&A. I'll try to keep a glance on the chat too, but the Q&A is definitely a little easier for me to manage. And you're welcome, Manish. Thanks for joining us as well. So Heather, one question, how do I experiment on infra safely without affecting end users? And
yeah, so this is really this really goes back to all the features we talked about, the progressive delivery, the progressive rollout. The point is we don't want to impact end users, right? We want to mitigate that as much as possible by giving you the control of wrapping your code in a feature flag and controlling that gradual release of who is actually exposed to this new change, with the limit exposure feature, with the percentage targeting, so that you have complete control that before it is even exposed to 1% of users or 10% of users, you can identify and quash issues as quickly as possible, right? And then you have that comfort of that slow release and ramp when you're ready, when you know there's no red flags to address.
Yeah, it's funny how some of this is, at least after the fact, is so intuitive. I mean, when CrowdStrike did their global oops, where they distributed a change, and by nature it went to as many endpoints as fast as it could, because that's sort of, they're trying to be available to do day zero interventions for attacks. Like literally, they could have just done an initial rollout to 1% and known right away, oh, we missed something, they're all crashing, right? Mm-hmm. And it would have been 1% of and even if they'd focused to a geo, even smaller geo or something, right? And Microsoft used to use the term rings, or ring deployment, and sometimes I'll talk to people like, oh, but we can't do that, or that's not possible with what we do. And the reality is that anymore, it's almost always possible. Not with everything, but if you're going to do something and there's the ability to actually make a decision, either on a user by user basis or a machine by machine basis, or even a request by request basis, how to treat that, you can definitely do a gradual, you can do progressive delivery. So I would just throw that in there. It's like, it's pretty easy for people to say, oh, that doesn't work for us. We're not rolling out an experiment to users about, with a prompt, which text are they going to prefer? That, literally you could start ramping up the new caching array, a little bit at a time, instead of like, okay, we're cutting over. Oh, shoot, the SSL accelerators aren't configured right. Whatever. Things happen.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here's another one that actually I think we get now and then, which is like, won't this slow down releases? And before I have you answer that, I thought there was an interesting conversation we had about automation. Oftentimes the word automation is used to refer to testing, which is, oh, have we done the automation yet for the testing? And that means we have to do extra work. We have to sort of stand still long enough to understand how the app works, and then we write scripts and make sure they work, and then now it's automated. But then we change something and they're broken again, and so is the automation caught up? And that's one kind of automation. The automation we're talking about here is what if I just intrinsically, because I'm controlling this rollout with a mechanism and I'm watching the rollout with the same mechanism, what if I just kind of get for free an automated way of watching, so that I don't actually have to do tooling or scripting or writing reports. Like, I'm just going to get this because I'm using this mechanism to control the rollout, right? So it would slow down releases if you had a different step was, whoa, we got to do all the instrumentation and we got to write the reports and we got to write the queries and we got to test them. And like, once you've got, if you've done this at all for anything, you generally have, it's just there for you all the time, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I would really stress that point, right? There's a large portion of what we covered today that's a one-off piece of implementation there to use and reuse, and it's that thought process as well of like you're iteratively checking before you roll out and progress, right? It's progressive rollout effectively. So instead of going with live, not live, and then maybe having to fix things and roll back, and you're arguably spending a lot more time doing it that way than doing it safely. Yeah, and there's a lot of repeatability in the platform.
Heather, there's a couple more questions, but I just realized we're at time. So I think we should probably give people their day back, and thank you all for interacting in the chat and for the questions and in the polls. And we hope you found this eye-opening, and that you do me a favor, visit that link at least once. My boss will know where we're doing our job. And Jared, thanks for getting us wrapped up.
Of course, Dave, Heather, thank you so much for taking the time to speak today. It's been a pleasure having you. Also, everyone who attended, I want to thank you again for joining us. This program was recorded. You will receive an email in your inbox shortly after we conclude today. As Dave mentioned, we do have some resources in the handouts, or some handouts in the resource section. Go ahead and click those. There is a survey. If you could take the time to fill that out, it's 4 quick questions. Your input is invaluable to us. Your feedback does go a long way here. It helps out Heather, Dave, myself, everyone here at TechStrong, and on the Harness team as well. Let's go ahead and close today's session out. Thank you again for joining this TechStrong learning experience, and I look forward to seeing you on the next program. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.